So the next story I want to tell is about why I ended up flying back home early. Many people were very surprised to hear that I had flown back, and a lot of people thought that maybe I was quitting my trip, and it's really quite the opposite. I don't know if I have enough money to fly. My plan is to fly back out, was to right after my reunion fly back out to Minneapolis. I don't even know if I have the money to do it. But the plan is, in a few days to fly back out to Minneapolis. So if you've been wanting to donate at some point, $25 or $50 for, to help me finish my tour, if that's something you've been meaning to do for the last almost a year that I've been working on this project, and you never got around to it, now would be a great time, because it'd be great to have the funds to fly back out, because I'm actually really eager to finish. I'm really eager to ride the rest of the way. I flew out from Seattle, and I'm flying back to Minneapolis. I'm not going to fly back to where I was, and I'm skipping a big section of the country for a couple reasons. One, because if I'm going to be really honest, that part of the country spooks me big time. The Pacific Northwest and that whole area, it's really spread out. It's probably the least populated section of the country outside of the desert. Maybe even the desert is more populated. So it's like a lot of riding all the time for very few towns until you get to Minnesota, and it's just a lot of wilderness and woods. And I'm a city boy. Like, I love the riding and I love the traveling, but if I'm not around people, if I'm just by myself, and I said that early on, like, the trip is not about the bike riding. The trip is about the Shakespeare and meeting people and performing for people. So if I'm not around people all the time, I start to get really spooked and we're really weirded out. That, coupled with the fact that it's probably the lowest concentration of black people or any sort of ethnic people in the whole country. I don't know. I'm not that comfortable with it, and that wouldn't dissuade me, or that wouldn't deter me from riding through that area normally. But it's gonna be winter soon, and I really want to make it back to New York by September if I can, so that it's still warm enough outside for me to, because the end of the tour is I spend a month in New York performing, if I don't just keep doing it on the street anyway in New York. But so to make an intentional effort to go to all the boroughs in New York and do the one-man Shakespeare when I get back. That was always the plan, to end the tour wouldn't actually end until a month after I got back to New York. So yeah, I just thought the best way for me to do that was to kind of cut a portion out of my tour. And really, if I wasn't back by the very beginning of October, at least at the very latest anyway, no matter where I was just gonna bus back to New York anyway. So I figured I'd just go ahead and cut out a section, because I'm really eager to go to Minneapolis, I'm really eager to go to Chicago, and I'm really eager to go to Detroit and to Philadelphia. So yeah, so that's kind of why I'm cutting a big section out. Let's see. So I just want to tell you real quick. So as I was getting ready to fly back home, it was a really crazy thing. I ended up in this town called Cle Elum in Washington, and in Cle Elum, that's where I ended up stopping. And I remember calling my director Jolie and talking to her, and at that point she was 10 days overdue from having a baby. My director Jolie had a baby. Is it a baby boy? Yeah, I think she had a baby boy. I'm gonna look this up now and make sure I'm right about that. So yeah, my director Jolie had a baby, but at the time that I was talking to her, she hadn't had the baby yet, and I called and was telling her, Jolie, I'm just really tired, and I don't really know how much I like this part of the country, and I need a rest. And I called her. Yeah, it's a baby boy, and his name is Nathan, that she had. So congratulations to her. And so I was telling her I was really tired. And then as we were talking, she was like, well, if you think you should take a rest, I think you should as well. And then as we were talking, I remembered that my high school reunion was coming up. So as I'm in this town in Cle Elum, I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to get a hotel room for the night and figure out what I'm going to do, and how I'm going to get out of here. So I'm looking for a hotel to stay in. I'm riding around to all these places. Cle Elum is a real small town, but somehow all the hotels are like $65 and up. I think the cheapest hotel room that I found in that town was $65. And I have very little money, so I didn't really want to shell out $65 for a night. So I rode to literally every hotel and motel in the town to try to find a cheap place to stay, and no place, the cheapest place was $65. So I went back to the place that was $65, and there was a guy hanging out outside who was riding his bicycle, and it had just done a ride and was get a lift home with his friend or his wife. I'm not sure who she was, and as he was like, "Hey, dude, where you riding from?" And I told him what I was doing on my trip, and he was like, "What? You rode from where? That's crazy," and all this, and I was gonna try to talk to the clerk at the front desk of the hotel and see if I could talk her down and give me a cheaper rate on the room, cheaper than $65, and that guy and whoever else were hanging out in the lobby, and I didn't want to try to haggle with the lady in front of everybody else. But those folks were behind the counter, so I assumed that they worked there, and I was kind of assuming maybe this guy has something to do with the hotel, maybe he's the owner or something. So I gave it a shot, and I went back in and I said, "Hey, lady, is $65 the cheapest you could do for me for a rate on a room?" And the guy who I was talking to actually ended up being like the manager or the owner of the hotel. Was like, "Give it to him for $35." So I got a hotel room for $35 instead of $65, which was awesome. And it turned out that right across the street, like literally just one street over, in the gas station that was next to the hotel, of all the hotels that were in that town, right across the street had a shuttle that came 2 or 3 times a day, or maybe more, to drive people back into Seattle to the airport. So that was incredible. That one hotel that was going to give me a cheap deal was also right next to the shuttle to back to Seattle. And there was one bike shop in town. Not only was that bike shop right across the street also from the hotel, just happened to be, this wasn't like the center of town or anything, it just happened to be those two things were right there. But I went over there the morning I was supposed to leave to talk to them and see if they had a box for my bike. Now, my bike is a Surly long haul trucker, and it's a touring bike, so it's bigger than most bikes. So it's really hard to find a box that'll fit it, because most bikes aren't touring bikes. So I go over and I talk to the guy and I tell him, can I get a box? And not only does he have a bike that fits my bike, but he gives it to me for free, and the guy helps me take my bike apart, because I still, for 5.5 months, don't know anything about bikes. Helps me take my bike apart and put it in the box, which is really awesome. Did all that for me for free. I was able to there was room on the bus for my bike. I was able to put it on the bus no problem and get a lift back to Seattle. And I at first I was really just kind of discouraged about it and scared, but I just prayed about it and said, God, if I'm supposed to go home, help me work this out, because I'm really tired and I really just want to figure it out. And all these things just came together and I was talking to my friend Dan Koenig on the phone, because I thought he would be coming back home for the reunion as well. I called my friend Brian. I was asking Brian something about me coming home, and he said, well, ask Dan about maybe he can drive you, because Dan lives in Colorado and I was in Seattle. So I called Dan, and Dan was like, man, I'm not coming home for the reunion. But then he texted me right after that and was like, hey, dude, heads up, Southwest Airlines has really cheap tickets, like $170 tickets to come home. And sure enough, I found a ticket for like $170 to fly home. So I found a really cheap ticket, because all the other ones I was finding were like $300, $200 one way. This was, $170, $160 I ended up paying one way. So all of that came together in 24 hours for me to be able to go home. Probably less than 24 hours for me to be able to come home and come to my reunion. So, I mean, all that was like a miracle. There's no reason any of that should have happened. Like, I should have hit a snag somewhere and everything fell together, and so I'm just telling this story to say that God is good. And I don't know, it seems like all those things are coincidental, but things like that happen to me all the time. And I think it's just because I pray for them and ask God for them, and it just happens. So that's the end of that story. That's the end of story number 2 of Stories from the Hole.